Michelle.
And I'm Laura, and this is the Pair Entrepreneur Club podcast, a fortnightly show to help you navigate the demands of being both a parent and a business owner. We will share lots of practical ideas, hints and tips, and our own and others' experiences with juggling work, family, health and finances. Above all, we want to help you find your purpose, define your identity, and banish any confidence gremlins that might be holding you back from the life you dream of. No matter whether you have children or not, there will be something here for you. Let's get started. So, just want to say thanks so much for joining us today, Luke. And if you just want to introduce yourself and tell the listeners a bit about what you do, that'd be great.
Great. Well, thank you for having me, Laura. It's a real pleasure to be on the Pair Entrepreneurs Club podcast. So my name's Luke Shillings. I'm a relationship and infidelity recovery coach. So I have a very unique and very sort of specialist area in which I work in. I help people who have been betrayed in their relationships, rebuild trust, find themselves again, move from that place of feeling paralyzed by betrayal into a much more sort of secure and empowered position where they can sort of truly take control of their lives. And often people have, and I, for example, have lived this journey as well, where you believe you know what the next 5 to 10 years of your life look like. And then all of a sudden the rug is pulled from underneath your feet and you find yourself in a very different position. So I'd been in a job for the previous 10 years working for the same employer. It was okay, but never really felt satisfied. Always felt like I could, have a more of an impact for a start just at the place that I worked. But there's a lot of restrictions, as many people will know, when they're working for another company, particularly if it's I worked for quite a small family business, so not a huge number of employees, and there was an element of being set in their ways. Things were done that way because that's how they've always been done. And although I understand that logic, and you have people needing to do the same things and everybody wanting to, the employers wanting their staff members to act like them, so to speak, the reality was it meant that most people felt like they weren't part of the team and therefore couldn't implement and couldn't influence and couldn't really change their journey. So it ended up feeling a little bit frustrating and I suppose resentful in some respects. And then in my personal relationship, I'd been married for 8 years at the time, 2 children, a little boy and a little girl, and they really were the focal point that I used once the next part of my life happened. So after being married for 8 years, my wife had an affair with actually a close friend of ours, and that ultimately resulted in us separating and then divorcing. Me moving out of the family home, which obviously changed my dynamic. I also no longer lived near the place that I worked, so things had really moved around in every sense of the word. I really felt like my life had been turned upside down. I did not know what the next day looked like, let alone the next 5 or 10 years that I was talking about before. My once secure but maybe not overly fulfilling job all of a sudden wasn't what it was, and I didn't really know what to do, so to speak. So as a parent, fortunately, in many ways, I focused much of my energy on my children in terms of trying to form a really solid co-parenting relationship with my ex-wife, and then start to look at other ways that I could change my future. Well, in some respects, it created like a blank canvas. It was something I could do anything with. And once I allowed myself some time to process everything that had happened and process the changes, I started to be much more intentional about what it was I focused on going forward. So that led me down the route of coaching. Stumbled across it really initially, and started to become much more interested in both the sort of the psychology behind it, the way I've always been fascinated about the way people think and why we think the things that we do and what motivates us and what drives us, and and the way, particularly fascinated with like the interaction between two human beings, when the dynamics, and seeing how one person could really spark another person and frustrate them. And I suppose then it became much more apparent that everybody blames the world around them for all of their misfortune. And of course, what coaching really taught me to begin with, and then I was able to sort of self-explore from there, was that it all starts here. It's all within. It's got nothing to do with what's going on in the external world, despite our brain's desire to try and tell us it's that way. And yeah, so I decided to train and become certified as a life coach. And then using my own life experience and the experience that I'd been through a couple of years before with regards to the infidelity and my own divorce, to try and use those tools to help people go through everything that I did. And that's sort of where I am now, a couple of years into my self-employed journey.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think, from my perspective as well, we kind of started at the same time in terms of starting up a business, and we've had a lot of conversations about coaching and psychology, because that's obviously something that interests us both. But what fascinates me as well is when you said just then about everyone thinks it's about someone else, and I know we've had a conversation about this, but it is that projection of, well, I'm trying to change, but everyone else should be changing as well, because why should I make all the effort? And I guess, is that something that you find, particularly challenging with your clients as well, and the people that you deal with? How do you handle that?
Yeah, so very much so. So because the majority, I actually work with people on both sides of the infidelity spectrum, both the betrayed and the unfaithful. But the majority is those who have been betrayed. And of course, they're in a situation where they've had this thing done to them. At least
Mm.
that's how it's perceived. It's been the other person that's cheated, it's the other person that's strayed and ultimately betrayed their trust, and much more in some cases. So the natural response is to blame. It's, this thing has happened to me. I didn't ask for it. I didn't, request it. I don't feel like I've had anything to do with it. They've done it completely independently, but now I'm suffering the consequences. Or maybe my children or our family, basically the people around us, are suffering the consequences. And although on some levels that is true, they didn't actually be unfaithful themselves. They weren't the ones that made that choice. By allowing themselves to live behind this almost comfort blanket of blame, leaves them in a victim type role. And once you're in a victim role, you then become completely powerless, because you're allowing the other person's actions, thoughts, and behaviors to dictate how you feel. Because the reality is, our thinking is what creates our feelings, not the other person's actions. The temptation is to assume that somebody does something or something happens in the world, and that makes me feel angry or frustrated or scared or happy or sad or whatever the emotion is. But actually, there's a missing section in between the event, or the circumstance, as I call it, and the feeling, the emotion that you experience. And that is your interpretation of it. It's your thinking and your beliefs and your belief systems. And it's that part that we tend to not really notice, because we're very reactive. We live in a very reactive world. Social media and advertising and marketing are all driven to pry in a way on the human's reactive response, in the hope that we'll do something before we think about it, by which time it's too late, including chocolate bars and biscuits and things that are sat in my cupboard calling out my name all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the other challenges in there is that, when we do go through difficult times, what we tend to do is rely on friends or family, and we look for advice. And sometimes that's not always the most helpful advice.
Very true. So yeah, and that's a great point to make. The friends and family are always have your best intention, or usually have your best intentions in mind. But often when it comes to friends and family, they sort of, they want to be on your side. And therefore, if you're blaming and angry and you're throwing everything externally, then they're doing the same thing. They tend to pushing it all outwards. And that doesn't really help you move forward. It actually, all it does is validate your situation and reinforces that victim status, and then you stay trapped and you can't move forward, because, well, not only do I think that I'm right, but now my sister thinks I'm right, and my mum thinks I'm right, and my best mate thinks I'm right. And when you're all ganging up together against the enemy, whatever that may be in this situation, and again, you become not just you don't just become trapped by this other person's actions. Actually, all your friends and family do as well. But the other interesting thing with friends and family specifically is they have an expectation of how you should behave, about how you should respond, and particularly when it comes to relationships and betrayal. And I think we've all heard these scenarios where maybe a couple you've known have been together for a while and then they've eventually split up, and you're friends with one partner, and you're like, oh yeah, he was bad news the whole time. Oh, I knew he wasn't right for you, and all this. And again, these sort of validating spot. But of course, the person who's actually just split up, even though those thoughts might be there somewhere, they're also feeling a lot of hurt and a lot of pain, and they put a lot of trust and time and effort into that person. And just to have that like ripped away, not only by the person themselves because they split up, but then it being sort of like almost like they're being prodded by everybody around them saying, well, this is how you should feel. You should be angry and let's get revenge and all the things. But actually you're hurting and you just want to just allow that emotion to be there and not react and not run away from it. Because if you keep pushing back and resisting, then you can't move forward, and you hold on to that resentment. And not only do you hold on to it with regards to the person that you're upset with or you're angry with, but you then take that into new relationships as well. So it's really common, these patterns, particularly in younger relationships, where one partner's maybe not happy in the relationship and they're blaming their boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife in the situation for all of their misfortune. So they decide that, oh, well, he's the problem or she's the problem. So that they somehow self-sabotage the relationship, or maybe they even actively choose to end the relationship and they move into another relationship. Well, guess what? The same patterns start to re-emerge. And there's a common denominator. It's the person who's not prepared to take responsibility for themselves. And I know that sounds tough sometimes, but nobody else is going to take the responsibility for you, despite your belief, perhaps, that they will. And the reality is they won't.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And, for me, I see this in workplaces as well. So it's not just on a relationship level, it's sometimes, the interrelationships at work. So it might be a manager and employee and history that's gone on there. And particularly as business owners, and you and I can relate to this in terms of starting up and the volatile nature of business, in that you have extreme highs and extreme lows. And actually, what we tend to do sometimes is look for external verification for our business needs as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I think in all areas of our lives. I mean, many people we're brought up with these set of expectations of how we should live our lives. It's go to school, get your qualifications, get a job, maybe go to university. Then it's find a partner, get married, buy a house, have kids. Pay into your pension, retire, and die. It's like that's the format of which we're all, loosely speaking, expected to take. And the problem is when those expectations are there, we live into it and we start judging ourselves against it. And then we start looking at, if we're struggling, which is normal, because actually life's not that easy a lot of the time. There are lots of challenges and lots of obstacles and things to overcome. And when we're in those situations, we tend to look at the people across the road, or we look at our friends, or we look at our parents, or we look at some other people to get an idea, to get that validation, that verification of what it is that they're doing. And it's like, but the problem is when you look externally, you don't really see the truth. And that's evidenced by the fact that you're not displaying your truth either. So if you're feeling insecure, worthless, or even just a little bit like uncertain, a little bit overwhelmed, and you don't know what to do, so you look externally, well, guess what? They're doing the same. They're looking back at you, and they're looking back at the next people as well. So all you have is everybody looking at each other and trying to figure stuff out, and actually no one knows what they're doing, and we're all winging it. And that's kind of okay. I think even just acknowledging that we're all winging it, even when you've got your stuff together, we're still kind of winging it. We're kind of fabricating these stories to describe our lives. We have this internal dialogue, this narrative that justifies everything we think about ourselves, and we're kind of making it up all the time as we go along. So with that in mind, it's like, well, make up a better story.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think it is so true, and from a parenting perspective as well, we are completely winging it. I mean, how many parents do you speak to that say there's no manual that comes with this baby?
So true.
Um, and it is a case of we've just got to make the best of what we've got at that time, and sometimes we are going to make bad decisions, but it's removing that judgment from ourselves and others, and that we're dealing with that best circumstance we've got at that moment in time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I think even just and it was said innocently, but even just when we tell ourselves that we've made a bad decision, well, actually, is that really true? The point is, we've
Mm.
just made a decision. We've actually made the best decision that we could at that point with the information, knowledge, and experience that we have. And how could you expect to do anything different? I could take a look back at any point in my life and think about decisions that I've made and maybe judge it from my current place. Now that I know X, Y, and Z, then maybe I would have made a different decision back then. But the point is, I didn't know X, Y, and Z back then. So how could I possibly expect myself to have done anything differently? The point is, I still made that decision with everything that I had available to me at the time. And I'm not really sure there's such thing as a right or a wrong decision. Really, if I was going to offer advice on anything when it comes to decisions, is just making one. Being in indecision is a problem.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because being in indecisions, it's kind of comforting because we're not committed. It's almost like when you've got, I mean, I know there are multiple decisions that can be made, but let's just take a basic. You've got either option A or option B. Well, if you're in indecision, you haven't committed to either. If you choose A, although I've lost track of which one was which. If you choose A, then once you've committed to it, then it could be the wrong decision. That's what you might be telling yourself.
Yeah.
So you then panic and come and retract, and it's like, maybe I'll go, well, option B. Oh no, maybe that one's back. So you're again stuck in indecision. So let's think about what's going on. Well, indecision feels safe because we're not putting ourselves out there. We're not taking the risk. And that's usually because we don't like feeling fear. We don't like feeling the negative emotion that might come with what if we are wrong? What if that wasn't the best choice? What if that doesn't work out quite as we'd hoped? But when we really break that down, all that actually is just dealing with the negative emotion, that negative feeling that we're experiencing. And the worst thing that can possibly happen is a negative emotion or an unwanted emotion. Even if you sit there and you're feeling a lot of anxiety or a lot of fear or anger or frustration or any emotion, it's just a physical vibration in the body. It's not actually hurting you. It might be unpleasant. You might prefer not to feel that way, but if you really pay attention to it, you become the watcher, let's say, and you really start to describe that physical sensation, then it cannot hurt you. So making a decision, committing to it, even if it doesn't give you maybe your preferred outcome, if the worst thing that can happen is you feel a bit crap for a bit, then it's worth taking.
Yeah, I think yeah, that indecision is so it is so you just get stuck in it, and a lot of people don't even realize they're stuck there. So it's being able to move on from that and think, okay, well, this might not work in the way that I expected it to, but in terms of like self-reflection, how can you then change the outcome or choose to do something differently?
Well, I think first of all, recognizing that indecision itself is kind of still a decision. It's
Yeah.
still a choice. You're choosing not to pick route A or route B. You're choosing to stay still. And when we start to self-reflect and pay more attention to what's going on internally, what is it that we're afraid of? Because ultimately that's what it comes down to. Every time we're in any kind of decision, particularly in our work as entrepreneurs, there are lots of decisions that we have to make. Should I try this piece of software? Should I invest my money here? Should I try marketing here? Should all these different little things, and of which there are hundreds, if not thousands, and the shiny lights all over the place, lots of things that we're being drawn to all the time. The temptation is to either just go for everything, but then of course all of a sudden you're either out of money, or you overwhelm, which is almost like the opposite of indecision. So the indecision is like keeping yourself in, and then overwhelm is you choose everything, and then all of a again you can't focus again. And like both of these, I almost don't want to call them emotions, because I think indecision and overwhelm they're almost indulgent in some way. They kind of, although they don't feel pleasurable in the sense of joy and happiness that we think, there's something rewarding about them. Either it's keeping us safe in some respects, and that's where the indecision comes to, and then the overwhelm makes us feel like we're doing something. It makes us feel like we're being productive because we've chosen all these things. But then the overwhelm becomes too much. We can't handle it anymore, and then we stop doing it, and we end up back in indecision again. We end up in this sort of almost this like figure of eight sort of cycle, emotional cycle, where we're going from active to inactive to active to inactive, and we don't really progress. I've sort of forgotten what your question was now. Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I was actually going to just ask you as well, because you have a podcast as well, which makes me very nervous. But I know you've been very successful with this. And what would you say is the most popular episode, or the best feedback you've got from that podcast as well for listeners to?
Yeah, sure. So particularly with there's two parts. So one is because of the field that I work in, when you and I know when we've been to networking events and I sort of stand up and tell everybody who it is that I am and what it is that I do, it's often met with some rather entertaining looking facial expressions, some of like genuine like intrigue and surprise and shock, and others is a bit of fear and like, oh no, I need to keep my distance. I don't want to be seen talking to Luke, because maybe people are going to think I'm either having an affair or I've got problems in my relationships, and I don't want to advertise that. So I get it. Having an audio only podcast for me works really well, because it means that I can talk to people just like I'm talking now, and they can be doing it while they're at the gym, while they're out walking, while they're driving to work. And it's really, again, from a business perspective, building that know, like, and trust. It serves its purpose so well, because when people do then jump on a discovery call with me and we have a chat about their situation, it feels like they already know me. That part of the journey is already done. It's really just ironing out the final details as to whether we're going to be a good fit to work together, which is so it's been really positive from that perspective. And almost all of my clients have come through the podcast, and I think it's for that reason. In terms of like popular episodes, it tends to be ones where there's a lot of it's been the titles or the topic, the specific topic. So other than episode 1, which probably is my most listened to episode, which makes sense because that's people trying it out. Oh, is this for me? Isn't this for me? The next best one is one about the topic of limerence, and I think it's because many people don't know the word. If they're not in the industry, in the field that I'm in, then it's not a word that most people. It's a bit like before COVID, nobody had heard of furlough. Even though it's always been there, it's always had that meaning, but now everybody knows what furlough means, but no one knew what it was before. Well, it's a little bit like that with limerence for people who have never experienced betrayal and never experienced the emotional desire or the like intense infatuation and lust that you have for another person, even though you are in fact still in a committed relationship yourself. So the limerence is often felt by the person who is being unfaithful. So just to give your listeners a brief understanding of what this word means, the person who has been unfaithful becomes attracted to a third party, to what we refer to as the affair partner. And this can feel intense, like all of a sudden they get like blinkered vision. They can only focus on this. They start to be, it's almost irrational in thought, but not dissimilar to the kind of lust and positive emotions that you get in like the honeymoon period at the beginning of a romantic relationship. But it becomes obsessive to the point where they can't then function properly in their relationships and sometimes in their workplace and other areas of their lives. And they then start to see their primary relationship partner as everything's negative. It doesn't matter what they do. They could do the best thing in the world and it'd still be seen through a negative lens because of the impact of the limerence. Now, I think it has such a pull and such an interesting tweak on on the sort of the psychology of the people listening to the episode, because those who are betrayed are like, oh, well, that's just giving them a get out clause. They can just say that they were in limerence, But then, of course, the people who are experienced, who are betraying, are thinking, oh, well, that explains why, So it's a really sort of controversial topic, and I think that's probably
Yeah.
why it was so successful as a podcast episode, but also with other social media promotion that I did around it as well. That nearly all of the posts and reels and TikToks and things were all, they were the most popular ones as a result, I think, of that word. So really interesting, but you can't predict it.
Yeah, no, that's it. You can't predict it, but I think it is those things that perhaps everyone wants to know but doesn't really want to ask subjects. That probably do intrigue and interest a little bit more. What just moving on from that a little bit, but what I always admire about you, Luke, is that whenever I have a conversation with you, you always know about technology as well as just the business side. So what would be your top tip for our listeners on like a productivity hack or something that you've used recently to help you in your business?
Okay, so yes, you're right. I like my technology, and I'm always trying out things to see what works and what doesn't work. I'm victim of the shiny light syndrome that I was speaking about earlier. So that there's a couple. One that I found really useful, particularly for I do obviously nearly all my coaching is done on Zoom, all done over the internet. Many of my clients are overseas, and I needed a method of being able to take notes. I was doing it manually before. I was either typing whilst I was coaching, or occasionally I was writing, or just trying to memorize it a little bit. I even found at some points I might even watch the Zoom recording back and then make notes, but of course that wasn't really a very efficient way of doing it. So I came across an app called Fathom, which is available for Zoom, but there is also another one called Fireflies, which is, I think, also available for a variety of the webcasting type programs. And it is an artificial intelligence based piece of software where it records the call, it gives full transcription, but then it also generates AI note taking. So it's like having a note taker in the room with you, just like you would if you were in a physical meeting and you had somebody there taking notes and then writing them up afterwards. It's all done automatically. So within seconds after the call's finished, you can generate the notes. That gives you a summary of the call. Now, I wouldn't necessarily use that as what I then corresponded with my client, but in terms of like a memory jogger, keeping track of things, being able to refer back, it's been absolutely game changing in terms of my productivity and efficiency, because I'm no longer spending my time trying to remember what was said, trying to remember what points were covered. I can now go, oh yeah, okay, bang, that's that. Now I can write a paragraph about that, and so on. So that's been absolutely great. Another one, which I've only started using more recently, is Motion. So I've always been pretty good at structuring my time. Through the school that I certified with, there is a tool called Monday Hour One. And the basic idea of Monday Hour One is on a Sunday night or on a Monday morning, first thing, you would write down a list. You'd just grab a scrap of paper, you'd write down a list of all of the things that you need to get achieved that week, including your sleep and your time with your children, and if your exercise, the gym, whether you go for a run, all those kinds of things, you're eating, literally everything that you want to get done that week, and then just sort of loose guidelines of times of how much time you're going to spend on those things. You then look at all your particularly as entrepreneurs, you look at all the tasks that you need to do and list all of those as well, and just do this on a scrap of paper. And this whole activity would normally take no more than an hour. You would then, within this hour, so you've written all this stuff down, you then use I would recommend an online calendar, but some people do actually do it in their manual. Obviously, the advantage of the online calendar is that you can move stuff around if things change. But all of the tasks that you're doing it with the outcome in mind. So instead of having, I'm going to work on my website for an hour, you would have, the task would be, I want to complete the About Me page. Like that will be, so it's almost like that on Wednesday at 3 o'clock, that will be done because you've committed to it in advance. So you take your list of tasks, list of things that you've written out, and you start putting them into your calendar. I was using Google Calendar for the last couple of years for this. I still do use my Google Calendar, but I'll come on to why I mentioned that. And input them into the calendar, and then basically that's where your decision making done. And we've been talking about indecisions. This is a prime example of it. All the decisions that you make throughout your week, all of a sudden you don't need to anymore because you made them. You made them all within that Monday hour one, or that hour slot at the beginning of the week, or on the Sunday evening, whenever it works best for you. And you can do this just for the 5-day working week. You can do it for the full 7 days. It's entirely up to you. But the main part is that you've decided what you're going to get done that week. You know when you're going to get it done, and you've allowed yourself enough wiggle room here and there. So an extra hour or half an hour here or there on each day. Should there be anything run over a little bit, or you have any emergency, you adjust. It takes a little bit of adjusting, but once you're in that flow, actually, it's incredibly powerful. Of course, most people that I speak to when I first talk about this, they're a fear of committing to not being able to change their calendar. It's like, well, no. I like to live free. I like to make decisions on the fly, and that might sound all well and good, but it really isn't very productive. So certainly in the business sense, I'm not saying that this is the best idea for everybody, but certainly in a business sense, when you do have things to do and you want to be actively productive in growing your business rather than just being stuck in the weeds, let's say, and just doing admin and just doing your accounts and just looking at your Google Analytics, or just writing some little bit of copy that you've corrected 30 times before you put it out live, or the 200th TikTok video you've tried to record. There's like the things that seem productive but actually aren't. Well, this is a much more efficient way of structuring. Okay, so I said all that because that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years. However, I've now moved on to an app called Motion. It might be something that some of you are familiar with. So Motion kind of does everything I've just said, but automatically, and it uses artificial intelligence. So you input all your tasks in the same way, and it's very simple and intuitive to use. And you put in the things that are fixed, like, well, this is definitely happening at this time. There's no flexibility on that. But whereas lots of other tasks that you do in the week, well, it doesn't matter whether it happens on the Monday morning or the Tuesday evening, or you can be flexible. But then if something changes, it just automatically adjusts your entire calendar to be as productive as possible for you. It's like having your own personal assistant literally walking beside you with your calendar, giving you a list of what you need to do next and in the right order. And if something changes, they sort everything for you. And all you've got to do is show up. And it's amazing.
Amazing. Do you know, I've looked into this myself, but I haven't actually tried it. So it's really good to have a review on that as well.
Yeah. So it does have a fee, and it's not the cheapest of software, but then relatively speaking, it kind of is. It's like $15 a month or something. So it's not expensive.
Yeah. And I've just written a blog on this actually about leveraging your time and how much is that value worth to you. So yeah, it's a really, really good one to know. So I know we could talk for hours and hours and hours because we do anyway.
Yes, we do.
But I just have one final question for you, or second to final, because we always end on a last one about a book recommendation. But parenting generally throws quite a lot of curveballs and unexpected surprises. And have you got any kind of shared experiences or things that you can suggest as to how you deal with that? And also, how you use your business to inspire your children?
Okay. So, yeah, parenting definitely throws up endless challenges. There's no doubt about that. It doesn't matter how well you think you've got something under control when it comes to your kids, like whatever phase they're going through, whatever challenge they're going through. Maybe they're struggling a bit with confidence, maybe they're having temper tantrums, maybe they're locked in the room all the time, maybe there's too much screen time, all the different things that they experience. And my oldest is only 10, and I've already got all of these problems, so I'm not looking forward to the next few years. But the point is, these things chop and change so quick that by the time you've got anywhere near solving them, things have moved on. So there's in a way a lot of freedom in knowing that as a parent, certainly for me at least, my number one job is keeping them alive, making sure they're fed, and they're not too unruly in public. But other than that, fairly free as a parent. And in terms of how I implement my entrepreneurial element, I mean, obviously I want to inspire my children. I want them to be able to see the different options that are available to them. I don't think that they necessarily should become entrepreneurs or follow in my footsteps in any way, but just to know that it's a very, very real option for them, I think that's great. I mean, as much as I love entrepreneurship, the reality is if everybody was an entrepreneur, we'd have some problems, because a lot of society is based on people going to work, and we'd still like all those people to go to work. So it doesn't mean it's the only route. And the kid's mother is, she's full-time employed, so the kids get to see that mix, that element. My daughter's also really fascinated in what I do, and always refers to me as life coach Luke, which is, I suppose, is what my trade name is. And her and her mates are often calling me, they shout, "Oi, life coach Luke!" and she has even sort of had a go at coaching me over Zoom a few times. She loves that. But even just teaching her some of the basics of how to think and how to feel and not to be afraid of emotions and how to interact with other people. I know you mentioned earlier, and I think there's a risk here. A common misconception is when you hear the word relationship, most people go to romantic, but relationship is what is a relationship? A relationship is one person's thoughts about another person or thing. So that could be your relationship with your boss. It could be your relationship with your mother-in-law. It could be a relationship with your children. It could also be your relationship with your job. It could be your relationship with money. It could be a relationship with food and your weight and how you look. And the limit is limitless, but you have a relationship with all of these things. And even though my podcast is targeted sort of specifically at those who have experienced infidelity and betrayal in their relationships, I have many listeners who have not experienced that, because the tools and concepts and things I talk about apply to all relationships. So it's hugely valuable. And I think if anything that my kids can pick up from that and hopefully learn from, then yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. And I think it is about sometimes just being honest and open with, your children's, to explain that there are times when, daddy's busy, or, we've got to deal with things, and understanding the reason why.
Exactly. And I think that is the difference. And I think seeing the difference between, for example, myself and the mother is that my work, although it's very flexible, so it means that I can go to their school plays and the sports days and things like that, where the mother's a teacher as well, so she's working the same time that they're at school, so it's much harder for her to do that. Yet her work is more 9 till 5 than mine. I mean, she does work a bit as well externally beyond that, of course, but and obviously she's off during the school holidays as well. So there's, again, it's just seeing such a difference, and there's not that one's necessarily better or worse than the other. It's just that contrast, and I think just having those things available so that the kids can see it and then make their own choices when they grow up, then all for it.
Yeah. Amazing. So, final question, Luke. And obviously, we recommend listeners to go and listen to your podcast, and the details of that will be in our notes. But is there any book that you would recommend for our listeners?
Yes, I mean, as we've been speaking about productivity, I would be surprised if this book's not been mentioned already, but one of my favorites that I come back to is Atomic Habits. It's one that I have had a lot of use myself from personally. It's sometimes I use techniques and tips out of there to assist my clients, and I think that's it's a really, really powerful book. But then it's, like I say, I recognize its popularity, so I imagine a lot of people have heard of it already. But something maybe a bit more specific to relationships, there's a book called Attached, which is about attachment theory. Now, attachment theory traditionally, when it was first discovered, was all about the attachment between child and mother, or child and primary caregiver. But as we grow up, we have 3 different attachment styles. We have secure, anxious, and avoidant. And these then play out in our adult relationships, and in particular our romantic relationships, and can have a huge impact. So that, I think, would also be a really interesting read. And then, of course, you can come and listen to my podcast, which is called After the Affair, and yeah, you'll learn everything.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, we will, like I say, put some a link to that in the show notes as well.
Brilliant.
But yeah, thank you so much, Luke, for your time today. Really, really interesting, and I'm sure our listeners will learn a lot from that and continue to learn from your podcast. And yeah, there's links to your website and everything in the show notes. So yeah, thank you so much again.
Thank you, Laura. Take care.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. We rely heavily on word of mouth, so if you found value in this episode, please hit subscribe and share it with family and friends. If you'd like to find out a bit more about us, you can find us on our Facebook group, Pair Entrepreneurs Club, or alternatively on Instagram, PairEntrepreneurs_club. We hope you have a great week and we look forward to talking to you next time.